It's another pleasure to have you all join us for the sixth edition of the Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation, CEGRAD UCC webinar. This happens to be the second for the year 2021, though the sixth session since this webinar began. And for today, we're looking at one of the approaches towards ensuring or achieving gender equality. And I'm talking of gender mainstreaming. Now, this is a strategy that focuses towards ensuring that public policies, programs, and others are all well balanced, ensuring that equal distribution is safeguarded for men, women, and for both. You are most welcome. My name is Akosia Chiabiasaki, and I am your moderator for this afternoon. For this afternoon, we are looking at gender mainstreaming, as I've already said, but then we're looking at it in the world of the academe, in the world of academia. We're going to be looking at gender mainstreaming and how it has played out in the world of academia. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And just as we do every time we meet here, we're going to take a welcome note from the director for the Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation of UCC, and she's in the person of Dr. Georgina Yao-Odro. She'll take the floor and then share a few words with us.
Thank you very much, Akosia. Good afternoon to us all. The Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation of the University of Cape Coast, Ghana, welcomes you all to the 6th edition of its webinar series. Well, today we're looking at gender mainstreaming in the academy. So why this topic? The fight against gender inequalities, non-inclusion of women, and hegemonic patriarchal order in society and institutions have been at the center of feminist movements and advocacy programs from time immemorial. Gender advocacy hinges on the belief that reducing or eliminating gender inequalities, which more often than not favor men over women, will greatly improve societies, life outcomes, and development in general. One key strategy employed by most individuals, institutions, and organizations for the purpose of reducing gender inequality and empowering women is gender mainstreaming. So what exactly is gender mainstreaming? That is something we are going to look at this afternoon. Here, we're going to look at the processes of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action, policy, or program in all areas and at all levels before any decisions are made and throughout the whole process. And this happens in all institutions. For example, it can happen in the political institution, in the religious institutions, in the educational institutions, among others. But this afternoon, we are looking at it within the educational institution. So we are interested in policies, research projects. If you're engendering the curriculum, what actually goes into all this will be looked at. Of interest is what goes into gender mainstreaming. What are the strategies or approaches employed in such undertaking? Who are the key actors in such activities? And what are the possible impediments that often undertakers experience? This will be crashed out this afternoon. In trying to address these issues, we have 3 seasoned speakers to take us through the topic. We have Professor Mansapra, who will set the pace with conceptual issues in the area of gender mainstreaming. This will be followed by Professor Spal Jesse on the practice and experience of gender mainstreaming, drawing on her experiences from the Koforidua Technical University in Ghana, where she headed. And then we'll want to compare to the international scene. So we'll have Dr. Kay Skinner taking us through the UK, drawing from experiences from some UK universities, how they also gender mainstream their policies and programs. On this note, we are very happy to have you all, our very cherished panelists and participants, for the 6th edition of the CEGRAD Gender Webinar Series. We look forward to a very interesting and engaging discussion this afternoon. Welcome once again, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Doc, for welcoming us warmly this afternoon to the 6th edition of the CEGRAD webinar. I would quickly introduce our speakers for today, and in no particular order. I have Professor Mansapra. She's a retired professor of sociology and a former dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and head of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, University of Cape Coast. She taught sociology and gender studies for 29 years at the University of Cape Coast and spearheaded the introduction of gender studies into the investee's curriculum. She has served on the boards of NGOs such as the Cape Coast Center for Women, the Third World Network, and the Foundation for Security and Development in Africa. She has a number of publications on gender and education, gender violence, and gender and sexuality. Professor Pra holds a PhD from the University of Frankfurt, Germany, and a postdoctoral diploma in higher education and international development from University of Kassel in Germany. Prof, you're most welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you here this afternoon. I have a second here from home again, Dr. Skinner, forgive me, Professor Smile Gisi. Now, Professor Smile Gisi is the former Vice Chancellor Rector of Kofedo Technical University. She was the first female to be appointed a rector of a polytechnic in Ghana. She ably led the transition of her polytechnic into a technical university. She has also held some positions in the school, including head of marketing and purchasing and supply department, director of research and new programs, and School of Graduate Studies, and acting deputy registrar academic. Professor Gisi holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in social sciences from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, a Master of Public Administration degree from University of Ghana, Legon, and a PhD in entrepreneurship and innovation from Swinburne University of Technology in Australia. She serves on the Association of Technical Universities and Polytechnics in Africa board as West Africa Coordinator of Women in Technical Education and Development. She's currently the president of Data Link Institute of Business and Technology, a private university college in Tema. Professor Smile Gisi, you're most welcome. I will fly all the way to Dr. Skinner and introduce her. This is the second time I'm meeting Dr. Skinner. She's appearing on this particular webinar series for the second time. Dr. Skinner is an associate professor in the Department of African Studies and Anthropology at the University of Birmingham. Her first book, titled The Fruits of Freedom, explores the history of grassroots political activism in the Ghana-Togo borderlands in the era of decolonization. Her second book, Writing the New Nation, was a joint work with Professor Wilson Yayo of the University of Cape Coast. It focused on African-owned and African-language newspapers in the Ghana-Togo borderlands at the time of independence. Kate was a Lebanon-funded international academic research fellow at University of Cape Coast in 2019. During her fellowship, she developed her interest in gender and legal reform in Ghana and gave a public lecture on child maintenance in historical and contemporary perspective. Presently, she's collaborating with Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofo of the Institute of African Studies, Legon, in an oral history and filmmaking project that explores gender activism and women's organizing under Ghana's military and single-party regimes. Dr. Skinner, though you're far away, you're so welcome home. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start the discussion with Professor Pratt.
Yes, thank you very much, Kate and Smile and everybody else here listening. Good afternoon, all of you. I'm happy to be with you this afternoon too. I thought that I'd say a few words on the origins of gender mainstreaming and then move on to factors that have contributed to its adoption in Ghana. Then I'd try and bring a definition of it, show what the features of gender mainstreaming are, and then finally talk about my thoughts on its implementation in the Ghana higher education landscape. Much of the knowledge base of our thinking on gender issues today was created during the last 3 decades of the 20th century. And during the global feminist movement, which attracted so many of us. And gender mainstreaming comes from that tradition. It's quite a well-known concept in Ghana these days, and some may have the impression that it is a new concept. It is not. The seed for gender mainstreaming was sown during the preparation for the UN World Conferences on Women, which took place in Mexico City in 1975, in Copenhagen in 1980, Nairobi 1985, and Beijing 1995. As data was compiled in preparation for the conferences, the gender gap in the whole world became clear. The data from different countries showed it. It was during the Nairobi conference of 1985 that the concept was first introduced. The Beijing World Conference on Women officially adopted the concept as a key strategy for the achievement of gender equality. The Beijing conference was important in that it set a global agenda for gender equality. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which was ratified by 189 countries. And the Platform for Action is a key policy document on gender equality. The UN Women's Conferences were a key factor in advancing the global feminist movement. In Ghana in 1975, Ghana followed the UN directive for countries to set up national machineries for the advancement of women. That's the precursor of our Ministry for Women these days. The National Council for Women and Development, NCWD, was set up then. With the establishment of this office, the demand for research on matters concerning women grew, and that also was the precursor for the development of women's and gender studies. In connection with the establishment of the NCWD, a challenge which affects gender issues and their mainstreaming becomes clear. I had the privilege of interviewing the late Justice Annie Jiagi in 1996 before she passed on. She was the first female judge in Ghana, and she was the person who drafted the document now known as the CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And she told me about the difficulty that she and her colleagues had in convincing the military regime that was in power in Ghana at the time to set up the National Council for Women and Development. They didn't understand the need for such an establishment, and the only thing that convinced them in the end was the fact that it was a UN directive. Now, isn't this the story of our lives when we act for the promotion of women and gender issues? I'll come back to this later. Gender mainstreaming in the academy. I'll focus on Ghana more. In retrospect, looking back and preparing for this webinar, I think there are several factors that contributed to the employment of gender mainstreaming in Ghanaian higher education. I have identified 8 factors. For one, some women in the academy feel the pinch of working within the climate of inequality and inequity prevalent in our higher institutions and are driven to act for change. A common means of starting this change is through the introduction of gender-related courses in the curriculum. Professor Techua Menu and her colleagues started the Development and Women's Studies program within the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana in 1989. I was one of the first external examiners to that program. It was very inspiring and gave me ideas for my own institution. In 2006, it became the CEGENSA, Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy. A similar process occurred in UCC. I guess we will talk about that later. The second point that I thought of, there is always when gender mainstreaming occurs in the academy, there is the presence of a management that is dedicated to gender mainstreaming and the need for equality in higher education. Third point, an academic growth of an organic growth of an academic interest in the status of women in Africa by Africans, especially women. Prior to the 70s, most of the research that you would find on women in Africa was done by Western women. And the prevalence of, the fourth point, the prevalence of feminist ideas and activism that is linked to a long history of Ghanaians women's Ghanaian Women's History of Association. There are all sorts of Makuo in this country. Another point, the fifth point, networking among women academics and activists within the country and across Africa. I personally benefited from workshops organized by colleagues at the University of Ghana and also from universities in South Africa. I mentioned the professors Amina Mama, Professor Techua Menu, Professor Jane Bennett. They set up an online group that supports academics, and it still exists. And they also started the online journal called Feminist Africa, which all contributed to the creation of an African knowledge base. And the sixth point, existence of a friendly funding climate for gender research, which was very encouraging for people interested in researching. At the same time, the ready funding climate made gender research respectable to the male colleagues. So, okay, they say, oh yeah, this woman is interested in doing women's things. But when they saw that funding was actually coming in to do the research, then it became, it gained respect. A seventh point, donor activity. Other universities in this country are encouraged to gender mainstream through donor activity. Last year, in a conversation with the representative of a donor agency, she mentioned to me that gender mainstreaming should be a requirement for the institutions they fund. And number eight, the eighth point, the backdrop of the African and global feminist movement. So all these are contributory factors. It is important to note, though, that gender mainstreaming in higher education cannot take place without the endorsement and cooperation of management. And I'll return to this point later. So what is it? I think we all know what it is. Dr. Odro, I think, defined it. Maybe I won't go into that. What are the features of gender mainstreaming? And I have 4 points here. One, a transformation of existing structures, cultures, general working environment, and practices, as well as attitudes. It is not sufficient to add on women's concerns to existing systems and structures, but it requires transformation from a gender perspective. Point number two, it also means when men and women work together. A gender mainstreaming approach involves working with both men and women rather than working with women only, as gender equality requires balancing the allocation of resources between men and women. Both men and women must commit to be part of the process. The third point, consideration of both men and women's needs and interests in every function of the institution. Gender mainstreaming does not preclude the need for women-specific or men-specific measures. Where men's and women's needs and interests are different, targeted measures may be needed where disadvantage or gaps are identified. Assumptions that issues are gender neutral should never be made. The fourth point, the commitment to gender equality and active participation of all staff and students throughout the institution. As an institution is the product of its social and cultural environment, attitudes towards gender must be challenged at the level of the individual. The ultimate goal is for a gender equality perspective to become normalized in all working practices, processes, and structures. So what goes into gender mainstreaming? I have here a chart. I wish I could share it with you, but I'll just go through. I have identified 4 stages. The first stage, you define the issue. What's the method you use? You use gender analysis, gender statistics, gender impact assessments, and then you consult. You have focus groups, gender stakeholder consultations. And the data you analyze, you gather, has to be sex disaggregated to identify gender inequality and gender gaps. Then using the findings of the analysis to plan actions, You identify key stakeholders for focus group discussion. That's the first stage. The second stage is planning the resources that you require. You need money. There has to be gender budgeting. You have to do gender procurement, and then you have to work out indicators. So say when you introduce a sexual harassment policy, after 4 years, there are certain things you want to see. Those are your indicators. The third stage is implementing the actions. Gender awareness raising is what you do. Everybody has to understand why gender mainstreaming is going on. You have to train the staff and students on gender equality. Everyone involved in the implementation needs to be gender aware and gender sensitized so that you have a gender sensitive institutional transformation. And then stage 4, you check your process. You have to do gender evaluation, gender monitoring, and factor in recommendations for planning. And this should be ongoing. The whole gender mainstreaming process is an iterative process. It's like a circle. You start, you plan, you do your research, you analyze, you implement, then you look again, you check and see whether everything that you had wanted to implement has been implemented, and what the challenges are, how you can tackle them, and so on. So these stages are what one goes through for gender mainstreaming anything, either a research project, a curriculum, a university. You define the problem, you plan it, you check, you act, you check. Having said that, I would like to go over what would go through gender mainstreaming at university. First of all, you define issues. One would have to look at policy documents such as the strategic plan, governance and administration practices and processes, staff recruitment and retention, statutes, administration manuals, finance and budgeting, student life, public relations, health policies, academic issues, curricula, knowledge management policies such as exam policies, graduation policies. Templates for gender mainstreaming in institutions are available online. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can be consulted and adjusted to suit the peculiarities of institutions. But it has its challenges. There's a necessity to train all involved and raise gender awareness. Active monitoring and evaluation need to be fed back into the process. Gender mainstreaming is a long-term process. It's not a one-off activity. 2, it can prove to be very technical, causing more focus on the technicalities and less on the content. 3, it needs to be monitored and evaluated constantly, at best by competent gender-sensitive bodies such as a gender center, gender desk, or office dedicated and equipped to monitor and evaluate it. It needs the support and commitment of management, and otherwise it will fail. It is also necessary to have a dedicated core of people interested and invested in it to drive it. We need male and female champions, not only women champions. Has it been successful in Ghanaian higher education? Personally, I have not seen any institution that has successfully implemented gender mainstreaming in Ghana. I mean, in a holistic manner. Some inroads have been made for sure, but many institutions are addressing single aspects of gender inequality issues such as sexual harassment with many challenges. They do not seem to address the issue as one that involves all aspects of university life and governance. Student and staff recruitment issues are addressed in a nonchalant manner. I do not know of written down policies that govern this. But then our country itself has no overarching gender policy. How can our universities see the need to mainstream gender in such an environment? We still have a long way to go in this country in terms of gender mainstreaming and gender sensitivity in our universities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Already, there are some who are asking if they can have your, what you presented for future reference. And I believe that we might talk about this after this whole program. We'll be taking questions from our participants as well for our panelists. But before we delve into the questions that will be coming up, we'll first take the presentations from all our panelists, and then we'll move on to the questions. So Professor Smile, Jussi, you've had a smile on your face the whole time, and it's such a pleasure to have you here. You'll be sharing with us your experiences having been among the first when we talk of vice chancellors or rectors for technical universities. What has been the experience like, you know, when it comes to gender mainstreaming in the academy or in the academia, and then having held such a position, how have things balanced out for you?
Thank you so much. It's very exciting for me to be part of this panel to contribute our knowledge and share experience to this very important subject matter. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think Professor Mansa has set a tone for everything, so I'll just go straight to the point to look at my later experience in the area. So let me start from when I became the Vice Chancellor, then maybe I can integrate some of my past experiences. My institute at my university at that time was in the process of concluding the 7-year strategic plan for the university. So they gave me the opportunity to be able to integrate my vision into it. So I saw it as an opportunity to push the gender issue because the situation so bad in the technical universities. When you look at the numbers in the leadership position, look at the female numbers in even the engineering programs. So what I did was I make sure that the whole trust in the strategic plan, 2016 to 2022, was focused on gender, just be able to achieve a gender mainstreaming to some degree. So we started by, after putting in the strategic plan, I didn't just smuggle it in, but doing the consultation before the stakeholders, the unions, to academic board, to council, we're able to explain to them why we need to gender mainstream in the university. And thank God it was accepted to be a trust. And that actually guide all our activities and trying to, in a way, be gender sensitive in most of our activities in the university. And you know, our annual budgeting is also based on the strategic plan. And the strategic plan was supposed to guide all our activities. So it was very easy to do that when we got the approval to have the gender mainstreaming as a trust in our strategic plan. That is from 2016 to 2022. So one of the activities was to set up a gender office. There was no gender office then, none in any of the polytechnic or technical universities. We keep referring to polytechnic because I started as a rector in the polytechnic before switching to a technical university. So that office was very helpful in championing this cause in a way that we're able to organize programs for the females and a lot of sensitization and awareness and motivation to be able to publish and be able to submit their papers for promotion and also take up leadership position. I had to go to the extent of co-authoring papers with some of the staff, the female staff members, to give them the encouragement to be able to push forward. And the gender office was not just for the lecturers, but we're also concerned about the students to make sure that we address the peculiar needs of the female student as well. And also to the extent of organizing clinics for the students in the basic level, the senior high school, the need to come, especially to come into science and technology area. So we really focus on that. Another activity was to have a gender policy. So we started preparing the gender policy to make sure that the whole institution identify the problem and also help us to be able to achieve the gender parity to a level. And I must say that I'm very grateful to Professor Mansa. She was very busy at that time, But anytime I consult her on the subject, she was always available to provide advice. It's very important to get somebody who has an expertise in the area to help you through drafting the strategic plan, the policy, and also guide us in the setting up of the gender office. And another thing that we did was to actually bring the male along. There was this male factor. We had a male lecturer that was very instrumental in explaining our problems and our issues to the males, for them to understand that gender mainstreaming is not just to favor the females or try to hide the females above the males. We want to let them explain that we have different needs, we have diverse views, and when you bring the women abroad in decision making, in committees and the boardroom, we have a very good decision, diverse views that will come to a very good conclusion. You go to academic board meeting, there's only one female or no female at all. And I remember when I was even coming to Kufria Technical University that was 20 years ago, at the interview, be a lecturer, they're at the all-male dominated panel. After going through all the documents and everything, then the principal at that time said, you said well, you're coming to Kufria because your husband works here. And I said, yes. He said, you want to use up our university, our polytechnic at that time, just to be going for maternity leave and be giving birth and all that. You can never be productive. So the rest of the panel, they burst into a laughter. And for the first time in my life, I refused to smile. I was very angry. So when they saw my reaction, he actually apologized to me. And I said, yes. So I said, no, these are some of the things. If we have a female on that board, nobody will make this remark. And if we females, we are more than just going for maternity leave and just our reproductive role. So I made it a point to make sure that even in all my activities, my work, I'll be able to balance the two very well. And my reproductive role should in no way interfere with my productive role. So I was also a good example. I gave birth to all my children in Kufria Technical University, where I was a vice principal to whatever, holding all those positions. And I never played with my work. And I also made my female staff to know that we all know in academia, wherever it is, every position is on merit. If you don't publish, you don't go for your PhD, you don't have certain qualities, there's no way you are going to get a position. So we need to step up so that our voice will be heard. So that was done. And I didn't just limit my activities to Kufria Technical University. I made it a point that all the VCs in the Technical University to nominate a champion, a female each, to have a meeting in my Technical University. And that champion meeting, we're able to empower them. We discuss issues and let them know that they should go out there and champion and gender mainstreaming, empowerment of women, and the women able to be leaders in their various technical universities. And the 9 women that came in addition to mine, making 10 women, they really took up the mandate. So now we have this, we call them women champion, female champion, women champions in the various technical universities. Although their institutions have not set up any gender offices, we have these women really working, mobilize the women, organizing female programs. And one aspect of the gender activities to mainstream gender, we didn't just concentrate on the females. My gender office organizes programs for the males on their peculiar needs. So it made them very interested. We have programs like the prostate cancer, how to overcome them, how to be very helpful to the women. You know, sometimes this elected position, they used to be elected like deanship, head of department, and vice chancellor. And because of politics that goes into all this selection, most women back out. But the women have been encouraged to come out for those positions, to hold those positions and be very successful in that as well. So that was another area. So, and another thing that I make sure I did was at the meeting of vice chancellors of technical universities, I rose to become the chairman. Gender mainstreaming was an item on the agenda. Gender mainstream on the agenda, and the VCs were asked to report on what they were doing in their various institutions. So they were forced to do something. The next quarterly meeting, they must tell us that they have done this, and how they were supporting the women. So that's also an advantage of having a female in the ballroom. I was the only female at VCT meeting and most of the board meetings. But an action must be taken. And I realized that these are conscious, these are strategic steps that must be taken to be able to mainstream gender or to be able to bridge the gap. And women, when we are given the opportunities, most of the women that are appointed as deans, as heads of equality department and other things, they have never let me down. Heads of department, they worked so hard. And I think it has been an example for everybody to see. And also, I was able to source for funds from a Commonwealth of Learning, because we needed to do gender auditing. We don't just want to be talking about it, but we need a scientific approach to know the situation of gender in my university. So we had a fund for the gender auditing. So we went around, the consultants, met all the various units, the department management, to come out with a clear position. And the situation was clearly painted and defined that apart from all that we'll be doing, we still have a lot to go. So that was also very helpful. And also the same call, I was able to secure some sponsorship. I'll be done very soon to make sure that at least when I was there, a female was sponsored to go for training outside the country, training and exposure to interact with other females. So these were some of the few actions, and I can say that before I left, the female leadership has increased in the university, and the sensitization, the advocacy. I was also able to secure some funding for female. I actually instituted scholarship for female students that want to enroll in any of the science and engineering programs. So I think I'll end it here and I'll come back again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Smile Chisi. We are grateful for you sharing your experiences, and congratulations on the many successes and achievements you chalked as you have journeyed your path in academia. I'll move to Dr. Skinner at this time, and she is going to be speaking on gender mainstreaming, strategies and policies in the academia, and she would be drawing on her experiences from the UK. So Dr. Skinner, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Akosua. Well, I'd just like to thank Prof. Mansapra and Prof. Smile GC, and also to kind of add that obviously both of the previous speakers have had experience of gender mainstreaming at a very senior level, whereas I think what I'm probably going to convey is something a bit more of a personal experience coming from somebody who's not quite a senior, kind of more at the mid-career level. So I'll sort of give you a kind of personal perspective on how I see gender mainstreaming in the UK HE context. And then as I go through, I might make a few comparisons with what I've seen in Ghana, see where the kind of points of connection are. So I think when we talk about gender mainstreaming in the UK, probably a good place to start is with the Equality Act of 2010. And obviously the Equality Act in and of itself doesn't do gender mainstreaming. What it is it kind of provides an overarching legal framework, which then kind of creates, if you like, the legal framework under which gender mainstreaming might take place in particular sectors, including the university sector. Now, the Equality Act, the language of the Equality Act is very much on anti-discrimination, which again is not exactly the same thing as gender mainstreaming. So the principles in the Equality Act are expressed in terms of anti-discrimination. And I think to some extent that bears resemblance to Chapter 5 of the Ghana Constitution of 1992, and particularly Article 17 of Chapter 5 in the Ghana Constitution of 1992, because it's a similar emphasis on anti-discrimination. Moving from there, one kind of interesting feature of the Equality Act is that it creates what's called the public sector equality duty. So what that sets out is that persons or bodies carrying out public functions must have due regard for the need to eliminate discrimination, harassment, and victimization, advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share a relevant protected characteristic. And the third element in the public sector equality duty is to foster good relations between persons who share a protected characteristic and persons who don't. So the Equality Act gives us these principles of anti-discrimination, and it sets out a public sector equality duty. And the public sector equality duty, you can see that it's moving beyond, if you like, the negative sense of do not discriminate, and pushing towards the more positive sense of show due regard for the need to eliminate discrimination. So it's not just kind of what you must not do, it's what you must actually seek to do. So I mentioned this idea of not discriminating against people on the basis of protected characteristics, and advancing equality and good relations between people who do have a protected characteristic and people who don't. So what are these protected characteristics? Well, they are age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex or sexual orientation. So sex is only one of like quite a long list of protected characteristics. And the Equality Act in and of itself doesn't really talk about intersectionality, but that is the way policies and ideas and discourses have tended to be moving, to see gender in connection with other characteristics, that yes, we are women, but we are women in particular positions, maybe of a particular age, of a particular background, maybe have a disability or don't have a disability, and so on. So the Equality Act itself doesn't really kind of spell out intersectionality, but the way that people think about that list of protected characteristics is has often tended towards intersectional ideas over the last few years. Let me just say a little bit then about how does that connect to gender mainstreaming. Well, as the two previous speakers have said, gender mainstreaming kind of came up as an idea with the World Conferences on Women, particularly Nairobi 1985, and then much more explicitly and concretely with the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995. So as Prof. Mansapra said, this has been going on for quite a long time. It's not really a new thing. And obviously then sort of understandings of gender mainstreaming and understandings of gender itself have been sort of changing over time. So I looked at the Council of Europe definition, which is actually also quite old now. The Council of Europe definition is gender mainstreaming is the reorganization, improvement, development and evaluation of policy processes so that a gender perspective is included in all policies at all levels and stages by all actors in policy making. So I think that's probably roughly where we are. I think there's probably quite a lot of agreement that that is roughly what we're talking about when we talk about gender mainstreaming. So how do we actually do it in UK universities? I think probably the closest thing that I've seen to the sort of gender mainstreaming that Prof. Mansapra and Prof. Smile-Juicy have spoken about is the Athena Swan process. And I suspect that if you asked a lot of sort of mid-career women academics whether they've been involved in any gender mainstreaming, the Athena Swan is probably what would come to mind for a lot of them. So that began actually in 2005. So it began before the Equality Act that we now have. And when it began, it started with a somewhat narrower focus, which was more on the hard sciences, where women were really acutely underrepresented. Just when you looked at the total numbers, women were such a small portion. But over the years, Athena Swan has spread beyond the hard sciences. And one of the things that I like about Athena Swan is that it can be taken up in units of multiple size, so you can apply it on quite a large scale, but you can also go right down to just the level of an academic department or a research centre and apply it at that level as well. So there are 10 principles in the Athena Swan, but the two that I think stand out for me, the first one is concern about the leaky pipeline in women's academic careers. And then the other one, which is related, is different and slower rates of career progression. But obviously the starting point for that was actually acute underrepresentation, particularly in some subjects. And initially Athena Swan was very heavily focused on gender. The 10 principles now do include Principle 10, which is a kind of recognition that gender is also intersectional, and Principle 7, which explicitly recognizes trans discrimination. So principle, how do we actually do it? Let me sort of just mention that. And again, this is a personal perspective. I wouldn't claim that I have led Athena Swan processes or anything like that. I've participated in them as a kind of backbencher participant rather than as the leading figure. So the idea of Athena Swan works on self-assessment, and that can be very interesting when it's taken down to the relatively small units, so where you're talking about a department rather than a whole institution. So the self-assessment process, you kind of have to start with data gathering, which is what both of the other two speakers have mentioned. And I think one of the reasons why I like Athena Swan is, or I like elements of the process, let's put it like that, elements of the process are useful. When you use the quantitative data, particularly if you work at the smaller, within a smaller unit, you're getting very good disaggregated quantitative data. And I think that's really important because whilst at the one hand, we certainly need approaches that across the whole sector and apply to a whole institution, there are certain aspects of gender inequality which are quite subject specific, or they vary a lot between academic subjects. So when you do that self-assessment exercise, and you literally will be counting your staff, you know, looking at, in this unit, maybe we are 70 academics, not just how many of them are men and how many are women, but look at the different ages, look at the professors, look at the senior lecturers, look at the lecturers, look at the research fellows. So it means that you're getting very fine-grained data, which I think is really useful and really important, and can avoid us, if you like, wasting too much time devising solutions to problems that we don't actually have in a particular subject, whilst we're missing a problem that we do actually have. So I really like this sort of capacity to get that fine-grained data. And the other way of getting data, and this is the kind of thing that I've participated in, is the focus group discussions. And these are, the ones I've participated in are not just for women, they're focus group discussions which are mixed. I would imagine that in some contexts they have focus group discussions where you maybe have some groups that are only for women and some groups that are mixed, but the ones that I personally have been in have been mixed groups. Also, kind of, you would look at what your institutional policies actually are. if you were in a self-assessment team. So you'd need to know the kind of policy context of your institution. But I think more than that, particularly when you're talking about the level of a department or a research centre or something smaller, the focus group discussions can really help you in understanding more of your everyday practices and how your everyday practices might be creating inequalities of opportunity. So, you know, one thing that often comes up is around what hours of the day we schedule things to be done and whether that creates obstacles for people who, you know, have to be at home at a particular time of day because of their children or whatever it is. So the focus groups can actually sort of see how the intentions expressed in an institutional policy may be getting undermined by your kind of everyday working practices and the way you organise things and divide up tasks within your own department or within your own centre. And out of all that, you're supposed to produce a comprehensive evidence-based plan, which then gets submitted, and your plan should also contain sort of ideas about how you're going to measure your own effectiveness of the changes that you bring. So I think the principles of this bear quite a lot of similarity to the processes that the two previous speakers have mentioned. So perhaps just briefly then, does it actually work? I mean, has it actually changed things in UKHE? And what might be our risks going forward? And are any of these risks shared in the Ghana context, or are we still looking at slightly different sets of problems? So I think within UKHE, when you look broadly across the whole sector, the stats would show that you don't have a problem of female participation, either at the student level or at the staff level. We have approximately half of people who are employed on academic and research contracts in the UKHE sector are women, but women still only account for 23% of the professoriate. So I don't really think we can say that we have solved the problem, that rates of career progression are different and generally slower for women. I don't really think we can claim some steps forward, but I don't think we can claim an overwhelming success in that area. The other thing that I would say, and possibly we can talk about this a bit more in the question and answer, is that I think it is difficult for us to keep relying on some of these kind of self-assessment approaches, given that the nature of our employment, and particularly our employment contracts, are changing. We have had a significant increase in the numbers of academic and research contracts that are fixed term. And we also have, beyond the fixed term working, we also have an increasing minority of staff who are working on very short term, what they call atypical contracts, even staff who are teaching on hourly paid contracts and so on. So for me, I think my main worry is that the progress, the kind of strategies for thinking about gender equality, for assessing ourselves, for setting ourselves goals, I do worry that these are not going to be sufficient to deal with the impact of the casualisation of academic labour. That when we have a growing number of people working on very short-term, very insecure academic contracts, I don't think that's good for anybody, but I think it has very specific effects on women because of the issue of taking maternity leave and being able to get back to your career after a maternity leave. So I think there's a real acute problem of short-term contracts and casualisation for women academics. And I do worry that the approaches that we've had hitherto, which have shown some progress, but as I said, they've not completely solved our problems. And I do now worry that they're going to be undermined by casualisation. So that's kind of the way I see things from my perspective. I'd be interested to hear from the speakers in the Ghana HE sector to what extent casualisation of academic labour is an issue, and whether this has been specifically connected to concerns about seeing a falling back in gender equality rather than an advance.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Skinner. There's a question here for you before you go off, and then I get to pose questions to our first two presenters. This is coming from Professor George Oduro, and he's asking, in gender mainstreaming, should the emphasis not be on gender equity rather than gender equality?
Yeah, I mean, that question about whether I should be talking about gender equality or equitable gender relations, it kind of nagged at me before I came into the webinar when I've been thinking about what I was going to say. And I think Dr. Oduro she's sort of hitting a really valid point here, that understanding equality as sameness is not always helpful, and that we also need to think about differences which can be treated equitably so that they don't keep giving rise to structural patterns of inequality. So yeah, I think that's a very good point from Dr. Oduro.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Jesse, let me come to you. You made mention of the fact that during your tenure as a vice chancellor for a technical university, the need of bringing men on board, to support in this whole idea of gender mainstreaming in institutions of higher education was important. How do you think that this can be achieved?
Thank you. I think the best way is trying to, it's not difficult as well, it has become very difficult to explain to them that for us to achieve gender equity and equality, it's not a woman's story. It's not a woman that's a champion, but it should be a concern for everybody, both male and female. So that is all. I don't know why it's so difficult for them. They always confuse it with feminism. But we are saying that we have a male, we have a female. But if we have a board meeting or a committee meeting, and we only have males there, we are not going to have any effective decision making because it's subjective, one or the other, though we have the rules and the statutes there. So I think it's just the sensitization, the advocacy, trying to explain points to them. Because as a vice chancellor, you have the rest of your management members, all of them males, and you want to make an appointment to that one that you, the vice chancellor, at your discretion, you can recommend somebody. How to explain to your management team that let's go for a female but not a male is always an issue. But when you get to a point when you are high at that level, we just veto that. No, let's give her a try and see. So the problem is there, though there is no law in Ghana discriminating against women, but the perception that I don't know whether they don't have confidence or trust the women, while their wives, their sisters, their daughters are females. I just don't get it, you see? But let's keep talking, let's take our time and explain, because if that's why I'm not very radical with this gender mainstreaming at all. Not at all. I'm never radical. But I think it's dialogue, explanation, because I tell my people that when we go to the gender office to go out and organize clinics for the females, we have more females in the university. It's still the advantage of the university. We are getting more females in technical and in the science and technology program. When we want to design our laboratories, let's take the female needs into concern. The overall, where the attire they wear at the laboratories. Let it be a little bit gender sensitive. When we are being budgeted, let it be gendered. So all these issues, I don't know, I think I'm talking too much. The issue is advocacy, sensitization, and I think it will get there one day, but we still have a long way to go.
You're not talking too much, Professor Chise. In the wider Ghanaian context, in the wider Ghanaian context, I want to find out from you, how do we as a nation actually ensure there is a national framework to ensure or enforce gender mainstreaming in institutions of higher learning?
I think we should just stop talking and pay lip service to it, because we talk a lot in our documents, even some of the boards and council, and one representative must always be a female. Okay, so if you have 3 or 5 government nominees, all of them will be males, then they'll bring in 1 female. So if you have 3 government nominees, at least 1 should be a female. Why can't you have 4 or 5 or 3 government nominees being females? So sometimes even the previous board, that female nominee, they never got anybody to represent a female for a long time. But the women are there. Why won't you go in for them? Okay, so that's one thing. And the appointment, the MD, this, whatever it is, the parliamentary position, we have the females. But maybe, I don't know what to say, whether it's a political connotation.
Do you think that the females themselves are ready to, find themselves in these positions as well?
I think the females are ready. The females are ready. If you give them a try, they'll be able to perform. I have so much confidence in the females. You just give them the opportunity, because most of the females that we have just picked up and give the opportunity, they have performed very, very well.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Chise. Dr. Skinner, let me come back to you. Kenneth Watson wants to find out, does gender mainstreaming relate to gender equality or feminism?
So I looked at this question. So Kenneth Boateng was asking about how gender mainstreaming in the academy can contribute to core values of feminism, such as reimagining power. I think this, again, it's a very pertinent question, and it gets to the heart of a lot of things, because when I think about my teaching, a lot of what I'm doing in my teaching, I teach mostly modern African history. I think a lot of what I'm doing in my teaching is helping students to see dynamics of power and to understand how dynamics of power work. Partly that's about gender dynamics of power, but I also will teach about kind of dynamics of power that come along with colonialism, with nationalism, and so on. So I do sometimes feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between the kind of intellectual goal behind the teaching to show students how to identify dynamics of power and to really understand in a subtle way how they work and how they reproduce themselves. And then the kind of institutional context in which we work. And I think where you have institutional contexts that are very flat and democratic, and you have a lot of autonomy around how you teach, what you teach, even when you teach it, it's easier to reconcile the kind of intellectual work that you're doing in the classroom with your own presence and your own engagement with other people and your contribution to creating a degree program and bringing up a generation of students in ways of thinking and so on. I think when you get very hierarchical institutions, which are very heavily managed, then you do have a bit of a problem of whether the goal of what you're doing is basically to help more women climb the existing ladder, as opposed to pulling down the ladder and rebuilding something that is more democratic. So I think quite a lot of academics do experience that kind of disconnect, and they do put quite a lot of value on the margins that you have to show autonomy in linking the kind of ideas that animate your teaching to your actual everyday work and engagement with colleagues and engagement with students and engagement between the university and people outside the university in order to achieve things. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it goes somewhere to answering the question.
Whilst you were presenting, you made mention of the fact that management of higher institutions of learning actually play key roles in ensuring gender mainstreaming in academia. So how important is the role of management in ensuring this?
Well, in many ways, gender mainstreaming is a top-down thing. And as Prof. GC said, you see, if there is no, well, she showed in a presentation that she was able to push gender mainstreaming. She's committed, she's interested, she wants it to happen. I know of institutions now where, you know, there is a plan and everything for gender mainstreaming to take place. But if the vice chancellor or the principal or whoever is in charge isn't particularly interested, then it has to come from the impetus has to come from the bottom up, you know, from those who have been charged with implementing it. And it doesn't, sometimes it becomes a very difficult situation. So that's why I'm saying management has to be very invested in it. Otherwise, it's difficult. That's one of the disadvantages also, I think, of gender mainstreaming. The challenges, I should say, not disadvantage. Challenge is better.
There's a question here, and this is coming from Cletus. Professor Jesse, Cletus Asabi wants to find out, at what point should we start inculcating gender mainstreaming? Should it be at primary school? Should it be at a secondary level? Or should we wait till higher education?
I would say from the house, from the home, right there. Okay, the way you treat the boy, girl, and the girl child, it starts from there. Before even with the socialization process is very, very key, because that small boy will become will go to school, the attitude will become the headmaster or something somewhere. So the best thing is the children that are coming up, the way we treat them, the kind of examples we give them in the house is very key. Then right from the primary, because what we are having now is a culture that is so much embedded into us that men should be the decision makers. When we talk about being in the helm of affairs, it should be the males. It's because of that culture, though we don't have any rules or laws against it. It's very difficult for us to change that mentality. They can't see a female heading an institution. They can't see a female being there. So it's very difficult for them to accept it. So the female, somebody tells me that, madam, for you to be the DC, you should get 150%, while the male should get 100%. For them to convince them after all the papers and everything, you should be 150. You get it? So it's a culture. So you should start from the home, the way you treat your boy child and your girl child before the primary and up there. We should not wait till we get to the higher level before we start preaching or teaching them about gender mainstreaming.
So if I'm listening to the response you're giving very well, then you are indicating that within our cultural context, the issue of equality does not exist.
Not at all.
Okay, so there should be a change from there.
Yes.
Okay, so I have a few comments. This question was asking, with your rich experience in the Ghanaian academic context, how do you react to the thinking that women are their own enemies when it comes to gender mainstreaming?
I don't think I agree with that. You see, we are all operating within a cultural system. So both men and women are brought up, we get the same stereotypes and everything. So how is it that men do not contribute to the problems, but it is women who are their own enemies? We are all in the same soup, more or less.
Right.
So I don't agree with that the fact that women are their own enemies, because even when women are doing things that go against other women, especially, let's take the higher education sector, sometimes it's because they feel pressure to conform to what pertains. Pressure to conform to the norm. And then you find women, doing things that seem to go against other women. It's because they want to be, that's just an example. So I don't agree at all with that concept of women being their own enemies. We are not. We are all acting within the same cultural system, and we react differently to the pressures of the culture.
Prof, I'm interested in knowing what has actually led to this thinking that women are their own enemies, because this particular issue keeps coming up. I mean, at each webinar, each time we discuss any issue relating to gender and gender-related stuff, I mean, this question comes up: what has actually caused this thinking that women are their own enemies?
It's a kind of blaming the victim issue, because we are not really ready to, I think, we may not be ready to engage with the situation as it is.
Right. Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Skinner, there's one question I was asking, but unfortunately, I think you skipped to answer a different one. It's coming from Kenneth Boateng. He wanted to know if gender mainstreaming is related to gender equality or feminism.
I think this one's a tricky one because, of course, feminism isn't a single school of thought. Yeah. So I think feminists in some school of thought might see gender mainstreaming as basically promoting the interests of women within the system as it already exists, rather than having transformative potential. I think other feminists would disagree with that perspective, and I think some people who do gender mainstreaming would also disagree with that perspective, because they would say that you are actually going to change the system when you include women equally and equitably into it. It cannot help but actually change things. So I think there's an element here of how much confidence and faith you have that when you make the participation of women more equal, are you actually going to change the structure, or are you just going to include people into the structure as it already is? It's in some ways it's a question that we can only answer as we see it unfolding.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Skinner. I'll be picking a few comments I have here. This is from Clara, and she says, Prof. Smile, your statement that we have to stop paying lip service, in my opinion, the root of this discrimination starts within the domestic context, where women reinforce culture by perpetuating the practice of assigning domestic roles. I believe that until the advocacy starts at the domestic level, gender policies on appointments, etc., will not be far-reaching because the females are less prepared for leadership roles from the domestic level. But I thought that gradually with enlightenment, these kind of domestic roles and the kind of training we give to boys, girls at home was sort of changing. Prof, is it still the situation in the Ghanaian context where the roles are still seriously separated?
I think it's changing gradually, but we are not there yet, because those I can see occupying the leadership position now, the culture that has been inculcated in them, we still have this kind of, still the men should be at the top. But now from the next generation, I think that's what we are actually working on. So we have a clinic that catch them young. From the next generation, the younger generation, things to change over time, because once we have the boys even cooking better than the females, because those years when you look at even some of our books, we have the male, the Kofi is flying the plane and Amma is sweeping the compound. Those kind of examples in our book. Kwame is doing his assignment, and Amma is fetching water. So I think in some of our books, things are changing gradually, but it will take time.
Right. Araba, if you can hear me, please unmute yourself and then pose your question. I hear you have one.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the fruitful discussions and deliberations. Hello, Professor Smile and Professor Mansa Pra. Lovely to see you all once again. I've been a beneficiary of their mentorship. Sorry, I can't show my video. I'm talking from Germany now, trying to finish my doctoral studies. Personally, what I like to share from what I saw from the two presentations is that yes, it's tough being an academic. There's no understatement about that, especially when you are a parent. It's very challenging. We did some statistics on the Ghana educational male to female ratios in 2016. And the data suggested that when in the initial stages at the primary level, there is actually a female imbalance to the male counterparts. And this trend follows through. I could provide this data later on if you'd like to see it. And this trend follows to the tertiary level. Now, I do not have an idea or a reason what happens at the tertiary level, but that's when the figure starts to drop. And if you follow through to the doctoral level, you would have quite an insignificant number of females going to that level. Now, as to what happens between the primary to the tertiary level, I think the professors can answer that question. Now, this statistics that was necessitated when, okay, I'm a lecturer at the Kumasi Technical University, and I realized that I was not getting students. And it was bothering me. So we started these engineering outreach programs to try and find out what is happening. And it was in the course of this that we found out these things. The imbalance is there, and I think it will continue to exist so far as the women in academia, the numbers do not or are not proportionate to the male figures. So we should expect it. Once the numbers are still single numbers, once we can mention a few names and celebrate, we will still have the issues that we face now. The solution, I think, is what Professor Smile and Professor Pra have been talking about all along: increase the numbers. To increase the numbers, we cannot still have the same working conditions to be able to increase the numbers. We can't use the same old formula and expect different results. It's not going to work. I'm a mother of two, and I have, if it had not been for the kind of support system I have, I know I would have given up by now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for contributing, Araba. Anyway, Araba, Cletus Asari would love to see the data on the male to female imbalance. He would love you to share that data with him. Okay, now let me go to Sunal. The question says, I would like to ask, how can some policies be made in order to implement gender equality, especially for some designations? Professor Jesse, would you take that?
Thank you. We just have to engender the policies that we are making, our statute, our strategic plan. And when we talk about the statute, you have the composition for anyway, still the qualification for those positions. So it's just another way that I try to, that when you form a committee drafting a particular policy, you make sure that you push the females there. You don't have all males or maybe just one female on the committee, because those committees that draft the policies and they come out with, they advise us on some of the activities and what to do. So it should start from there. And as Araba said, if we don't publish, if we don't get a PhD, if we don't get a high level, you can never get appointment, because the status of the appointment to the promotion committee, it should be deans, HODs, provosts, and what have you. If females are not occupying those positions, you don't blame anybody if you have all male boards. So the only thing we have to do is we need to develop ourselves. So that was one thing that I actually did, encourage the females to go and get their PhD, encourage the females to publish. Some even had their document, but how to present it was an issue. Encourage them to present the document, help them to prepare everything. So as soon as they get a promotion and a qualification, they can be able to serve on those positions. And that will help us in drafting of those policy documents in the universities.
Right, thank you very much. It's unfortunate I will not be able to pose any more questions, but then I have a few comments here. One is from Ernest Ako, and it reads, Akosia, I think we can take inspiration from Article 27 of the 1992 Constitution, particularly Clause 3, which guarantees women equal rights to training and promotion without any impediment from any person, to create a national or university framework for gender mainstreaming in higher education. And there are two others in response to the fact that women are their own enemies in terms of gender mainstreaming in institutions of higher education. It says there is no wrong that females have done against other females that men have not done against other men. So why do people say women are their own enemies? How do we push this in the gender mainstream? And Irene, you said women being their own enemy is about the woman in charge being assertive and trying to do what is right about an issue. The same female colleagues take it differently, even though a male head might exhibit the same qualities. And this came from Irene. And sadly, I will not be able to pose any more questions because we have spent our time together here. I will take the final comments from the Director for the Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation, CEGRAD, Dr. Georgina Udru, and we'll be wrapping up.
Thank you very much, Akosia. It's been a very interesting and engaging afternoon. We were lucky to have very seasoned professors take us through the topic. Gender mainstream is a very important topic, actually. It's something that keeps on coming over and over, for which reason CEGRAD decided to look at it this afternoon. And we're lucky to have Professor Mansah setting the pace with a historical perspective. And she traces from the international level through to the national and then institutional level, making reference to Legon, but also to UCC and how gender studies actually became a part of us. Professor Smile continued with her own experience, but luckily for both of them, they were at levels where they could really push through because, as Kate said in her presentation, for us, she presented from a personal level. Those two will say we're at the institutional level, helm of affairs, of which they were able to push through their agenda. This presupposes that if gender mainstream is really a top-down approach and then moves from the top to the bottom, then we really need management support to push through the agenda. Because when you are at the bottom and you have ideas and you want to push through it, it becomes very, very difficult. Another take-home message we got from this afternoon's presentation had to do with the need for maybe a national policy, a framework. Recently, with the sexual harassment issues that came up in the West African sub-region, some countries have taken it upon themselves to have national frameworks, for example, Nigeria. What about Ghana? What are we doing? We have a national gender policy, yes, but can we have a policy for higher educational institutions in the country which will bind all? There is a program by the Association of Commonwealth Universities where institutions in some Commonwealth countries like India operate within a national higher educational policy. So each institution quarterly need to report, like we talk about the evaluation, the monetary assessment and all that. So if you are required, it's a binding for you to report, and you would be pushed through to really go ahead and implement. But if it's about us and when, who is in charge, who may be interested, then that would be a difficulty. So it's something, we are really happy to have Professor Dore Dubuando, who is our Pro-BC, as part of the audience for this afternoon. So we already know that we have management support in that regard in helping to push through some of this agenda. The issue of male involvement also came out strongly, that if you are talking about gender mainstreaming, it's not all about women, is it all about men? We need both on board, and we are happy to have some of the men most of the time participating in our webinar series. We had a lot of professors, because of time I can't mention them, but we appreciate their presence. We hope and pray that together they will all help so that we push through the agenda so that UCC can move forward with gender mainstream at all levels, at the institutional level, but at the policy levels, and also even within the curriculum. And through socialization at the household level, we can achieve something. Thanks so much to our participants. Without you, we couldn't have had this engaging time. And our three special panelists. Kate, this is your second time. We really appreciate that whenever we turn to you, you never turn us down. Our moderator, our technical support, our staff, and all in sundry, we appreciate you all for your time. Thank you very much. and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joe. We're grateful. So that's how we wrap up for today's session as well. We are so, so grateful. Dr. Skin, it's a pleasure meeting you again for the second time, I guess. Professor Mansapra, so grateful to have you on this platform. And Professor Smalchisi, it's a pleasure to have hosted you too. So thank you, everybody. Hopefully next month, we'll be meeting again with an interesting discussion that would all enjoy. Until then, the very best is what I wish for you. My name is Akosia Achiabiasaki. Thank you so much for being a part of this session.
Thank you. And also,
enjoy the rest of your day.
Next month is International Women's Day on the 8th of March. So we'll have a special program to that effect, though our webinar series every month. Next month is going to be very special because it's International Women's Day. And the theme is Women in Leadership in the Era of COVID. So please do join us to deliberate on this very interesting topic, hopefully on Monday, the 8th of March. See you all. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you. And thank you, Augustine Terrier. You tell us you're listening from Coventry. We are so grateful. We're so grateful. All the best to everybody till we meet again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.